whatever it is that we're aiming toward, it's not going to be a straight line. It's never a straight line. We all know this, right? But then we set off to do something and it's not a straight line and we're like, whoa, why is this happening? The waves, they feel like ups and downs. They feel like highs and lows. And these waves are an intrinsic part of the process. They are a necessary part of the process. There's no way around experiencing waves and therefore experiencing what will feel like highs and lows. And this episode is about the experience of riding those waves. Welcome to How to Trust Yourself, the podcast for anyone who's done with the endless second guessing and ready to tune in to your inner guidance. I'm Anna Holtzman, and I get that feeling of trudging through life like you're wading through mud, trying to figure out which way to go. In my 20s, I spent more time asking what should I do with my life than writing about crushes or bad dates in my journal. I've tried on a lot of answers: architecture, publishing, editing reality TV for a decade, and finally landing on therapy and coaching, helping people like you connect with your purpose. But here's the thing I've learned through all those twists and turns. Trusting yourself is the key to moving forward, even when the path feels messy. So if you're ready to stop doubting yourself and start listening to your gut, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to another episode of How to Trust Yourself. And this episode is going to be a little different from the most recent ones. I'm doing a solo episode. There's no other interview guest, but I'm going to be interviewing myself. I know that's a little funny. It's a new experiment. We're going to see how it goes. I had this idea for an episode a little while ago, and it was an episode about me and a recent experience or an ongoing experience that I'm having. And I honestly am not that comfortable doing solo episodes. I'm much more comfortable when I'm in a conversation with someone. There's a back and forth. For me, that's an easy flow. Having it just be me talking to me is a little less of a familiar format for me. And so I had this idea because I'd like to do some more solo episodes, and I'd like to, start getting comfortable with it. Use the idea of graded exposure. When I first started this podcast and when I first interviewed someone on it, that felt scary and uncomfortable and different and weird, because the nervous system perceives new as suspect and not quite safe necessarily. And so we we need to like ease our way into things before they feel safe and comfortable and even fun. So I thought I'd love to get to that point with doing solo episodes. So I'm going to dip another toe into it. And I thought maybe I could make it a little bit more comfortable for myself by introducing an element that is familiar to me, which is the interview format. So I know this is going to sound weird. I don't know. Maybe it won't sound weird, but I wrote up a list of interview questions for myself to ask myself. I thought maybe that'll make this format a little more comfortable for me to start getting into. So we'll see how this goes. Today, I'm going to interview myself. And just to orient us to what's the point of this episode today? What am I going to be talking about? In the most general terms, I'm going to be talking about the human experience of riding the waves. Whatever it is that we are aiming toward, and you might be aiming toward a whole range of different things at the moment. You may be aiming toward recovering from chronic symptoms. I mention that because that had been the primary focus of this podcast for its inception and earlier episodes. So that might be why you found this podcast. Anyway, you may be aiming towards recovery from chronic symptoms. You may be aiming towards writing a book. You may be aiming towards starting a business. You may be aiming towards improving the dynamic with your partner or with your kids or with your family. You may be aiming toward just so many different things. And there might be one thing that's particularly in your focus right now. There might be a bunch of things. Whatever it is that we're aiming toward, it's not going to be a straight line. It's never a straight line. We all know this, right? But then we set off to do something and it's not a straight line and we're like, whoa, why is this happening? The the waves, which, they feel like ups and downs. They feel like highs and lows. And these waves are an intrinsic part of the process. They are a necessary part of the process. There's no way around experiencing waves and therefore experiencing what will feel like highs and lows. And this episode is about the experience of riding those waves. And inevitably, we find ourselves fighting those waves, and we need to bring ourselves back into recognizing that the waves are part of the process and find our way back into riding the waves. So that's kind of the theme of this episode. And as the luck of just being a human being would have it, I happen to have a great example of that today, this morning. I'm recording this in the morning, which is that when I made the plan to record this episode and I put it on my calendar, because if I didn't put it on my calendar, trust me, this would never have happened. Um, when I made the plan and I wrote up the list of interview questions, I was on like a crest of a wave. I was on a high feeling. I was feeling up. And I had this idea, this inspiration. I made the plan. I put it on my calendar. I wrote up the questions for myself. And as luck would have it, I'm sure it's not coincidence. Now that this appointment popped up on my calendar and today's the day and this is the moment, I am not on a high, as it turns out. This appointment catches me on more of like a moment of self-doubt, a moment of like, what am I even doing? Uh, with this podcast, with my life as a human being in the world in general, like, what is the point of me? What is the point of everything? It's like it happens to be one of those moments. And I think that's probably because of a combination of things. One being that I'm on the waves. Things are not a straight line ever for anybody. So um, this is like a part of my wave cycle that is cyclical, and I've come to realize it's a normal part of the process of life. And I think it's also a response to, just like recent events that happen to be going on in my life, in the world, some uh some tragic, and there's just like a lot that I'm feeling about that. Some are more like exciting things in life, but it's like, I just kind of, went on a just an effortful or like a I was in a highly energized state for a few days because I was doing things that were exciting to me, but they were stretching my brain, and now I'm kind of tired. And thirdly, I think it's because I knew that this appointment that I had made for myself was coming up, and I'm a little afraid. I'm, you might not believe that because I sound like I'm just talking, and I'm kind of in the flow now that I've started. Now that I've begun, I do feel like I'm kind of in the flow. But when I saw this pop up on my calendar, I was like, no, maybe I just won't do this. I really do not feel in the mood. I was like, I don't feel in the mood, and I feel really low energy and tired. And I really don't want to do this. And then I thought, well, that's kind of like the perfect time to do this. Anytime is the perfect time to do this. But what a great example I can use and share both with myself as a reminder to myself and with listeners, because we all can use these reminders over and over and over again. that it's okay to be not in the mood. And I'm not saying that to say, like, it's okay to be not in the mood and, like, you've just got to do it anyway and force yourself to do it. No, like, it's also okay to let yourself off the hook. And it's okay to honor not being in the mood and to check in with yourself and ask, what do I need? Maybe I need something different instead. Um, and maybe I'm going to put this off for later. That's fine if that's your choice. And it's a completely valid choice, honestly, in all seriousness. Um, and if you choose to go forward with the thing that's on your plate anyway, you cannot be in the mood and still have all of your intrinsic worth and value intact. You can open your mouth and say something that will be of value to others, even if you're not feeling in the mood, or maybe specifically because you're not feeling in the mood. Because when we allow ourselves to show up authentically and just share honestly about how we're feeling in the moment, that has a lot of value to it. You know, it gives permission to ourselves and to anyone who's listening to also be themselves and to be authentic and to remember that it's not only is it okay to not be perfect, but that whole idea of perfect is a total myth and a trap. So it's okay to decide not to do it if you're not in the mood, and it's also okay to decide to do the thing if you're not in the mood. You can still show up as yourself and, you know, provide lots of nurturing and value to whoever is is listening. And then I was also thinking it's okay to show up and feel scared to do the thing. And if you noticed, I paused just now. It's because I'm feeling fear. I came into this feeling fear. You know, this so doing a solo episode is not something that I am used to yet. And so it still feels kind of new and kind of uncomfortable. And that triggers my nervous system. And so there's fear that's coming up. And one of the things I experience when fear is present is I'll like blank out a little bit, feel like a deer in headlights. So I want to remind both myself and you who are listening that it is okay to show up in fear and to do the thing anyway. And again, not as in like a punishing way, not to say like feel the fear and do it anyway and, you know, force yourself to do it and don't be a baby or whatever horrible things we were taught to say to ourselves. Um, but rather, when fear shows up, we can acknowledge the fear and remember, like, oh, yeah, let me speak to myself kindly. Let me remind myself it's okay to feel fear. There is nothing wrong with me for feeling fear. There's nothing wrong with fear. And if I'm feeling fear, maybe I need a little hug. Maybe I need to, if you're listening and not watching this, you won't be able to see it, but I'm holding my hands to my heart. I'm comforting myself, soothing myself, giving myself some little taps on opposite shoulders because I learned that that can help our nervous system feel calm. But, you know, it doesn't really matter whatever you feel drawn to, whatever soothes you. When you feel fear, you don't have to stop everything. You can, and you can also comfort yourself and soothe yourself and take one step and then another. So I'm here doing that right now. And I'm cheering for you in whatever way you are doing that. Whatever, even if it's the tiniest steps forward, they are steps forward. It's movement. It's movement. So I'm going to take a breath and take a beat and take a sip of water before I begin this interview of me with myself. And I also want to take a moment to say thank you, listeners, for being here with me and being on this little journey with me. Thank you for being here. So, the first question that I apparently had for myself when I wrote this list of questions weeks ago is, can you introduce yourself? This is so ridiculous, but I'm just going to go with it. Can you introduce yourselves with listeners who might be new here? What brought you to where you are now in your coaching journey? Okay. So, hello. If you are new here, my name is Anna Holtzman. This happens to be my podcast, and I am interviewing myself today. Welcome to this podcast called How to Trust Yourself, a journey that I am ever on with myself. And what brought me here, gosh, maybe I'll just like give a little nutshell of where I've been and how I got here, going really all the way back. Um, if I'm going to go all the way back, I was born in New York City in 1977. I still live in New York City, but I'm on my third borough. I was born in Manhattan, then moved to Brooklyn, and now I'm living in Queens with my wonderful partner and my stepdaughter and three orange cats. And I could go on and on about them and go on a tangent. But my professional journey has taken many, many twists and turns and pivots. I studied architecture when I was in college, and my intention was to graduate and go into the field of architecture. Um, Soon after I graduated, I pivoted into publishing, and I worked at an architectural trade magazine. It was like a trade and design magazine, writing and editing stories about architecture. Did that for a number of years. And then I pivoted again and I got into filmmaking. I learned how to do film and video editing and intended to be an independent filmmaker. And on my route to finding a living with those skills, I wound up editing reality television and did that for 10 years. And um, I had never intended to stay there for that long, but it was good money and there was a lot of work in that field. And I wound up being there for 10 years and um, eventually decided I needed to move on because this was just like not the place I was meant to be forever. And I got a life coaching certification. I had been in therapy myself for many years and found that process to be really interesting. And um, I just got so much out of it. And I worked with some coaches as well. So I dipped my toe into that field first by getting a coaching certification and then by going to grad school to become a therapist and got my mental health counseling degree and then license and um, moved, switched careers, became a therapist and a coach. And over the course of working in television and then being in grad school, I um, was experiencing migraine headaches starting when I first started in TV, and they gradually became more and more frequent. And when I was in grad school, the migraine headaches became extremely frequent. They really started to take over my life. And um, really, just as part of my own path of trying to find a way to manage those migraine headaches, I came across the whole world of mind body healing, um, a particular branch of that world that is heavily influenced by someone named Dr. John Sarno. And I recovered from migraine. I uh, found my way out of that chronic pain spiral. And that was so life changing that I decided to make that the focus of my therapy and coaching work once I had graduated from grad school. And so for the last really 5 years, that's been the focus of my work is helping others to recover from um, mind body symptoms. So these are usually chronic symptoms, often chronic pain, but they can be a whole host of other things. Um, and yeah, to recover from chronic symptoms using the practices and principles of mind body medicine. And I have been engaged with that and loving that for 5 years. And more recently, I started to get inner hints and clues, some of them subtle and some of them loud and uncomfortable, that I was starting to be pulled in a little bit of a different direction. Not so much leaving the mind body coaching behind, but repurposing it or really evolving it um, to have a new, more expansive, I'll say, direction. So I can feel I'm starting to ramble a little bit, and this is actually leading me into my next question for myself. So the next question was, you recently pivoted from chronic pain coaching to a new version of your coaching practice. What inspired this shift, and what fears or doubts came up along the way? Whew, okay. Fears and doubts, that's going to take up plenty of time because there's been plenty of them, and I'm still rolling with them. But what inspired this shift? So that's really like a twofold answer, but both of these things are completely intertwined with each other. So as I was working with clients, both therapy clients and coaching clients, on recovery from chronic symptoms, what I started seeing almost immediately is that the work would start with, of course, a focus on the chronic symptoms. I mean, obviously, that's where it started. That's why they came to me. And everyone's pace and timeline is totally different and unique. But what would happen gradually is that the work would shift as the person began to untangle those tight knots of fear and symptoms and tension and like all the things that contribute to and hold together chronic symptoms. As that tapestry started to loosen up and unbraid itself, it was as if that, I'm going to call it a tapestry, like the tapestry of tension was all we could see at the very beginning, because that was all that was present, and it was the problem, and it was what brought them to me. But as that tapestry began to unbraid itself and loosen up, what became so incredibly apparent was that it was as though the tapestry was in the shape, I'm just going to use metaphor here, like the tapestry was in the shape of a tight little ball. And as it started to loosen up and open up and expand, it became apparent that there was something that actually had been constricted and locked away inside of that ball. Like the tapestry loosened up and opened up, and space opened up. And it was like, whoa, I can see something emerging through the holes that are now starting to open up in this tapestry, and there's like a light shining out of it. And again, this is all metaphor that I'm using to describe what I would see in my experience, which was that there was this like incredible, like blindingly bright ball of life energy inside of that tightly constricted tapestry of fear, tension, and symptoms. And as the tapestry loosened up, that light shined out, and then we could kind of like open up a hole in the tapestry and let it fall away. And then that life energy, that light would emerge and come out, and it would want to find a vehicle. It would want to find a channel, something, it would want to find something to pour into to give it shape and purpose. And that would take many different forms, and oftentimes many different forms within the same person. So like that might and has in various people I've worked with. Here are some examples of the forms that it has poured itself into. I've seen it pour itself into writing a book. And a client of mine wrote a book, and I interviewed her recently on this podcast. So if everything rolls out in the order it's supposed to, you can look back a few episodes and read or listen to her episode. Her name is Ashley Hasiodes. And I've seen that life energy pour itself into other creative passions. I've seen that life energy pour itself into mending a marriage that seemed like it was really on its way out. I've seen that life energy pour itself into having children when that seemed like a faint desire, but like an impossibility because of all of the symptoms and fears and tension. I've seen that light pour itself into leaving a relationship that was no longer serving the person, but they were so afraid to leave, but they really needed to in order for their life energy to continue to grow and expand in the way that a plant grows and expands into the world. Um, I've seen that life energy just pour itself into so many different forms, but I think you get the picture. So this is what I was seeing with clients just over and over and over again. Everyone has their own version of this. Um, and what I found so exciting was that once this life energy started pouring itself into things that were generative and growth oriented, that wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't like, okay, now everything's smooth sailing and everything's a straight line, but rather new fears came up that needed support and help to be worked through and coaxed through and melted through together. And so like I'll use Ashley as an example because I interviewed her on this podcast so you can really hear her share her story. Um well, one of my absolute favorite um, ways to work with people is the way that's exemplified by the time when Ashley was writing her book, and it's a personal story, it's a memoir, and as with everyone who writes a memoir, I think all of these fears would come up. Fears of like, well, what if I get in trouble for saying my truth? All this stuff. What if I don't really have anything meaningful to say? All this these we all can relate to these because they're the same fear voices that so many of us experience. And when these fears come up, we need to meet them with love so that we can move through them. And that is the work that just lights up my heart like nothing else. Like I almost want to cry just talking about it. It's so uplifting and it just feels so purposeful and powerful. And I just got a little chill. And so I started off this answer by saying the answer is twofold because that was what I started to see and experience with my clients. And simultaneously, and not just in parallel, but intertwined with that, I was and am and continue to experience the same thing myself. That as I moved further and further along my healing process and my recovery from chronic symptoms and everything that go with them, all of the both physical and emotional tension. Um, the same thing was, is, and continues to happen for me. That my life energy was like freeing up and expanding and searching like very hungrily for places to pour itself into, like for vehicles of meaning and purpose, excuse me, to pour itself into. And that's an ongoing process. And so um when that process was in its early stages, when I was in the early stages of my chronic pain recovery, the vehicle that my energy most wanted to pour itself into was the vehicle of helping other people recover from chronic symptoms. And so that's what I was doing. And as that life energy in me continued and continues to expand and grow and move outward into the world the way we're all designed to do, just like plants, um, it started letting me know that it was like reaching for not to abandon the chronic pain work, not at all. And I'm still engaged in that in various ways, and ongoing with, because that's an ongoing part of many of my clients' experience. But my energy wanted to expand into a more expansive vehicle of working with people. And that that vehicle that it was craving is supporting people with their own expansions, with their own, uh, following their passions, for lack of a better term, just, going for that creative dream that they have, writing the book, starting the podcast, doing the thing, bringing their energy, their gifts, and their purpose out into the world. And so that is what has inspired the shift. Yeah, I've been calling it a pivot, but it's really more of an expansion in the work that I do. And this brings me to the second part of the question I asked myself, which is what fears or doubts came up along the way? And the simple answer to that is all of them. Every freaking one of them, all of the fears and doubts came up along the way and continue to come up along the way. Although they are softening as I'm moving further into this process. But in the initial stage of this pivot/expansion of my coaching practice, which is a business too. So it's a pivot in my business and how I market myself, how I talk about what I do. Um, I really avoided this pivot for a long time. I now can see that looking back. I didn't recognize that's what I was doing at the time, but it felt really scary um, to say that I was doing something new that wasn't solely or specifically focused on chronic pain, because that was sort of the brand or the identity that I'd been building for myself in my business and my practice and my professional life for 5 years. And so the thought of it, I realize now, terrified me, because when I look back in my notes and journals and like notes to self on my phone and all that stuff, I can see that I was um, moving toward this expansion for like a long time, over a year, but I wasn't quite ready to fully let myself go for it yet, because it just didn't feel safe enough yet on an unconscious nervous system level. And so when I decided to actually um, do this pivot or expansion and start to talk about it on the avenues where, that are available to me, on Instagram, on my newsletter that I write to folks on my email list, on this podcast, and in conversations with colleagues, actually, which that felt very threatening in the beginning. And it's funny because they've all been just like nothing but supportive, but there was so much fear that came up for me. And like the the voices that fear took on were wild, like really extreme, because fear was really pulling out all the stops in trying to stop me from doing something that my nervous system perceived as too risky or dangerous. And so the fear voices that I was hearing in my head were saying things like, you're going to completely, like, your business is going to collapse, and I mean, a lot of it was about money. Honestly, it's like, you'll never be able to make any money ever again, because no one will want to hear what you have to say when you're talking about something new, and everyone will abandon you. You'll have no friends, you'll have no clients, you'll have no colleagues. You'll like fall into a dark hole in the universe. You won't have contact with humanity or with the world. Like, it went This is how my nervous system operates. And if, in case any of you thought it was just you and you were alone with like a nervous system that is just wild and just overwhelming and says the most outlandish, out there things, you're not alone. My nervous system is, I love her and I'm going to just call her a drama queen. Brings the drama so loud and so wild and so far reaching, and it's not just the stories or the voices, but it's also the physical sensations. I mean, I was like waking up in what felt like a cold sweat uh pretty much every day for, I'd say, it was about a month and a half from the moment I decided to start talking about this pivot or expansion. Like every morning I'd wake up and with shoulder tension and like like tightened up into a ball. And just the first thing on my mind as soon as I woke up were all these worries and fears that I just named. And my heart was racing and just anxiety, physical and emotional anxiety. So, I mean, I could go on describing that for ages, but I think I've done it justice. That though that describes the fears and doubts that came up, and that describes the kind of like torrent of it that came up initially when I decided to make a shift. It was like powerful and felt engulfing, and how I moved through it honestly was through daily journaling to come home to myself, grounding practices, breathing, walking, a lot of taking walks, a lot of walking by the ocean, which I'm very fortunate to be able to do. I find the ocean so grounding and centering, and a lot of conversations with close friends who are extremely supportive, who I know will be supportive and who really get me. I'm so fortunate to do the work that I do because it's brought me into contact with colleagues who really get it and who I just adore. And I really had to push myself to open up to them about the fears I was having, because fears are often pulling me to self-isolate and to, tighten up into a ball and be all by myself with it. So I had to really push myself to continually open up to good friends and peers. Um, and I will say that it's been several months now. I'm several months into this shift in my business and in my practice and professional identity. And I think it feels like a much bigger shift to me than it does, honestly, to anyone else. I think most people that I've spoken to have said, well, this just seems like a natural extension of the work you're already doing. But to me internally, and especially to my nervous system, it felt and feels like a big shift. And so, yeah, for like a month and a half, the fear was like very, very intense. It hasn't gone away, but it's a lot gentler now. And it comes in waves rather than like just like an onslaught, like a constant onslaught, or what felt like a constant onslaught. It's more in waves. So like the space between waves of fear is expanding and increasing as time goes on, and the waves themselves feel gentler. Sometimes they still feel really wild, but the fact that there's more space in between them gives me more, it just allows me to recover more easily, and gives me more time in that safety feeling space. So yeah, I think that answered that question. Um, Next, this is such a funny experience reading my own interview questions. I'm a good interviewer because the next question makes a lot of sense. It says, you mentioned journaling, as I certainly did, as a lifelong or as a lifeline during this pivot. Can you walk us through how you use journaling to ride waves of fear and tap into your intuition? Why, yes, I can. Thank you, me, for asking that great question. So, how I use journaling as a lifeline. I love journaling. That will be no surprise to anyone who has listened to any of this podcast in previous episodes. But I I've actually journaled since I was about 19. Went through like a very difficult and heavy depression pardon me, when I was 19 and I was in college. And um, my mom actually at that time told me to start journaling. And I did, and I have been journaling ever since. But from the time I was 19 till the time I was in my early or mid 40s, I journaled in the way that I think, I don't know, maybe most people think of journaling, just kind of like writing down whatever I was thinking or feeling and kind of things that had happened. And it was really more like a record. Yeah, I was like working stuff out in the journal, but I wouldn't say it was really much of an emotional tool in the way that I use it now, or it was just different. It was not as transformative as the way that I use it now. Then in 2020, early 2020, when I was in like deep, deep, deep in my recovery process from migraine, and I had learned a lot of the mindset tools and like kind of the brain retraining stuff. If you're curious about all that, please listen to earlier episodes of my podcast. Um, and then I kind of hit a wall and I knew I needed another tool to help me go deeper. And I came across the work of Nicole Sachs, who is a therapist and an educator and an author, a podcaster, and an expert in chronic pain recovery and the mind body connection. And her specialty area is using journaling to heal from chronic symptoms. Her work is amazing. Definitely check it out if that speaks to you. So I learned her journaling method from her, not from her directly, but from her podcast and she has some YouTube videos on it. And I learned her method and practiced it for like every morning for about a year. And as I was using her method, over the course of time, I was first just copying her method, the way she did things, because that's a great way to learn something that's new for you, for me. And gradually, as I got more into it and got more comfortable with it, I then started to improvise and bring in elements that I'd learned from other people, other practices, just things that came up out of my own intuition and sort of blended it into a method that really, really, um, that I really connected with and that helped me connect with myself. And that method was something I created a course to teach other people that method, which was called Writing to Release Chronic Pain. Um, and I used and taught that method for a long time. And gradually, I continued to evolve it in my own journaling practice into a method that was like just like the shift in my coaching practice. It was not so much a change in the method as more of an expansion of this method. So I call the method that I now use, I call it the melt through method. Sort of a play on the word breakthrough, because what I'm often looking for when I go to my journal is a breakthrough. But before I get to the breakthrough, I need a melt through. And I'll just describe what this process is. So, in order to tap in and get connected with myself, first, I need a warm up, just like as if you were going to an exercise class or a yoga class or a meditation class. It's like you don't go right into deep meditation or right into a deep yoga pose. You need a warm up first to help the mind, body, and spirit and energy soften into it. And so, my warm up is I'll go into a private room. I'm fortunate to have my office here at home where I can close the door so I get some privacy. I get into a comfortable seating position. I have a little sofa here, and I turn on some music because that's just my thing that gets me into the space. So I put on this it's a Reiki playlist that I found on Spotify. Whatever, it just is what works for me. And then I take out my journaling pad and pen, and my practice, this melt through method, it's a harder in terms of its two different journaling sessions. And for me, they're both short. I've been doing this for a long time now. So I just write however long I need to write. It used to be that I would do these like 20-minute journaling sessions, which I learned from Nicole Sachs. That was very helpful for me for a while. Now that I'm just like very well practiced at journaling and just very comfortable and I can connect with it more easily, I just write for however long I write. And it's usually like one side of one page each for my two sessions. So the first session is I'm connecting with my fear. And so I'll just check in with my fear in whatever way it happens to be showing up in that moment. So it might be showing up in some body tension. For me, the usual suspects are like I might be feeling some head tension. I might be feeling some neck and shoulder tension. I might be feeling like tight shortness of breath or tightening in my stomach. Um, so I might tap into one of those, or what might be catching my attention more in the moment might be a fear story. It might be a story like, you can't slow down, you have to keep going, you've got to like race, rush, rush, rush. It might be something like that. Or it might be just like a, ugh, everything feels gross right now. So whatever it is, I'll start a conversation with it. And the conversation has three questions, and it'll go like this: Dear shoulder tension, or dear everything feels gross right now, what are you feeling? And then I will just let that part of myself answer on the page and share its emotions with me. Like, I'm feeling scared right now, but also angry. But I feel impatient. I feel annoyed. And I'll just let it ramble for as long as it wants to ramble. And that is the first step to softening because now I'm like getting in touch with it. This practice is about connecting in with the relationship with ourself. And it's just like any other relationship. So, like with my husband, to keep our relationship alive, we check in with each other in various different ways. And it could be, it doesn't have to be like really intense all the time, but we need to have little check ins now and then. And I'm not even talking about like a scheduled check in. I'm talking about like we both work at home. So like we pass each other in the hallway and we say, "Hey, how are you doing? How's your day going?" That's a check in. Other times it's much deeper, but it doesn't always have to be. It's just a way to stay connected. So this is my way of checking in with myself. Like, dear rush, rush, rush feeling. What are you feeling? What's Tell me how you're feeling. And I let it answer. And then the second question is, what would you like me to know? And that's a question where I'm asking it like what message are you trying to give me? Not like what's the deep meaning of life that you're trying to communicate, but like what are you telling me with this body sensation or with this thought? And oftentimes, it could be something like, I'm trying to tell you to like shut it all down and hide under the bed and don't do anything ever again. Oh, okay. Thanks. Thank you for articulating it so clearly. And then the third question is, what are you trying to protect me from? And I let it answer. And so that answer might be like, I'm trying to protect you from like the disappointments of like having nobody respond to the workshop that you put out there. I'm trying to protect you from disappointment or failure or judgment or rejection or whatever. Oftentimes it's some version of that. Sometimes it's like I'm trying to protect you from like feeling the sadness that you're feeling right now. I'm trying to protect you from feeling your feelings. So whatever it is, invite, I ask these questions, I let that part of me answer, and I take a breath. And then, and this part for me is really, really important. And I think it's a part that we, myself included, just tend to skip over if we don't have a process for it. I offer that frightened part of myself a loving and compassionate response, the type I would give a friend if they came to me with all these fears and stories and feelings. I offer it a compassionate response, and I do that in writing on the page. And I say, thank you so much for sharing all these feelings and worries with me, fear. I love you. I'm here with you. I am on your side. I will never leave you. I adore you. I'm with you. I'm going to be there for you. I'm always with you. We'll get through this together. You're not alone. Whatever it needs to hear. It needs different things on different days. And I just sense into it just the way you sense in with, like, what does your friend need to hear? I love you. I love you. So that's actually part one. All of that is part one. And then I take another breath. And by the way, I don't always go through this step by step. I have this structure to come back to if I need it. But do I do it exactly as I'm describing it every single time? No, I play with it. I experiment with it. But this is the structure that my improvisations are based on. So I take a breath and I take a stretch. I let my body stretch out because there's like all this energy that I've kind of invited up that's like come like concentrated itself in my body through this process. So I give that energy some space to move around in. I stretch my body out. I breathe. Oh, sometimes I wind up yawning and I might take a sip of water. I might have to blow my nose because this process often brings up my nose running. And give myself a beat, wait till I'm ready. And then I move into phase two. So, phase one was about checking in with and connecting with the fearful part of me. You could call this the frightened nervous system. You could call this your inner child. You could call this whatever you want. And phase two is about connecting with my life energy. And I use words that work for me. They don't have to be the same words that work for you, but I'm just sharing with you what works for me. So to tap into my life energy, I like to call it my inner free spirit. That just works for me. And so in phase two, I'm connecting in with my inner free spirit. And I start off by just closing my eyes and letting a moment float into my mind, a moment in time when I felt really free and in tune with myself and just in love with life. And if you want to try this yourself, this could be any time, any moment in time. It could be from your early childhood. It could be something recent. It could be on a vacation you were on once. It could even be like an imaginary experience that's come to you in a dream or right in this moment or while you were reading a book or watching a movie. It doesn't matter where it is. It's just about calling in that feeling. And for me, it happens to be a time when I was I think about 5 years old, and I was in, um, on a Greek island with my mother on a trip, and I grew up in New York City where I didn't have a lot of autonomy. It wasn't a place where I was free to, like, roam around by myself, but in on this trip, in this location, I was just, like, let loose, and I would just run around this whole town by myself, just racing down these streets and like going into shops and smelling things and like looking at things and it was just like a wild animal. And that feeling, I just that memory just brings for me this feeling of being free and in love with life. And so I bring to mind whatever memory speaks to me that day, but it's often that memory. And then I go back to the page and I write, "Dear free spirit, what are you feeling? Like, what are you feeling in that moment that I captured in my memory?" And I just let the free spirit answer, and for me, it's usually like, I'm feeling free. I'm feeling wild. I'm feeling the wind rush past my cheeks. I'm feeling curious. I'm feeling in love with life. I'm feeling. I let it answer. And then the second question is, what would you like me to know? And oftentimes the answer that comes to me is, uh, come with me, come with me. But it has all kinds of it's whatever it answers in the moment. I just let it answer. And then the final question is, what are you inviting me into? What are you inviting me into? And it might be inviting me into just trust the process, just keep going, trust life, keep going. Or it might be inviting me into a project idea that just came to me, or it might be inviting me into, I want to go to the beach, or it might be whatever it is. Um, it brings me back into my connection with life. That's what it does. And then it sets me up to move into my day from that place. I'm not going to stay there. This is not a static state now where I'm going to stay in that incredible or just alive feeling for the rest of my life that day or even that hour necessarily, but it's just a coming back to that feeling. It's a touch point. And what question did I even ask myself? I asked myself, you mentioned journaling as a lifeline during this pivot. Can you walk us through how you use journaling to ride waves of fear and tap into your intuition? Well, that's how I do it, what I just described. And it's not as though I stayed in connection with my intuition or that I ever stay in connection with it continuously. It's that I come back to it periodically. And especially when I'm going through a big shift, I make a point of coming back to it daily as much as I can. Meaning as much as I can stick to that daily. Not that I'm doing it a million times throughout the day, but just that I try to do it once a day. Um, you know what? I had how many? I had so many more questions on the list for this interview, but I have already made it to the end of an hour. And I think that was enough for this interview. So, what a beautiful thing. I've got a whole nother set of questions left for myself to do a whole nother episode. I'm going to put a bookmark in it for now. And yeah, if you want to learn more about this journaling method, if this spoke to you, get in touch because this is what I teach in my workshops, in my one-on-one programs, in my coaching. I teach it in different forms and in different ways, but this is kind of the central practice that's infused into all of the work that I do with people, and all of the ways that I support people, even people who don't like to journal and who don't actually use this practice in the way that I use it. But it's these principles, these emotional practices that can be practiced in other ways that don't involve journaling. These are the elements of it. Thank you for taking this ride with me. I hope you got something out of it. I know I did. I feel a little bit more comfortable with doing solo episodes. I can't believe how fast that time flew by. It's just such a pleasure to connect with you. I'm sending you tons of love. I'm sending you tons of encouragement. And I just want to normalize this experience of these waves of fear. You are not alone. Even if you experience wild waves of fear, you are not alone. I can relate. And I I hope you're taking something from how I move through these waves of fear. We all have our own wisdom that helps us through these waves of fear. And if something in this episode spoke to you, I would love to hear about it. And if there's something you want to hear more about, questions that came up for you that you want to that you want to have discussed and explored on this podcast, send them to me. Message me on Instagram. I'm at Anna_Holtzman on Instagram. Send me an email, Anna@AnnaHoltzman.com. Let me know. Reach out to me. I love connecting with you. Lots of love. And I'll see you next time. Bye. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor. Hit that follow button so you don't miss a thing and leave a rating or review. It helps more people find this show, and honestly, it makes my day. And if you're looking for more ways to trust yourself and start listening to that gut instinct of yours, come hang out with me on Instagram at Anna_Holtzman. Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, trust yourself. You've got this.